Right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Councillor Sharon Patrick, for those who don't know. I'm actually the Vice Chair of Audit Committee. And because Councillor Lynch can't be here tonight, so you're going to have to put up with me, not only in my my apologies to everybody on that. Going to be late, and Councillor Crouch. We haven't got any others, have we? No. Okay. The next item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meetings, page 7 to 16. Right. The next item is which is
for those. Do we? Hi, Jessica. Yeah, so we have a log, but they've all been done. But I'm very happy to provide an update. Yeah.
Is the item in your pack that's called the finance update, which will include the performance update and most of the treasury management update. And I think Mr. Williams is going to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Chair, and absolutely happy to do that. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all well. So what we're going to cover this evening, and hopefully, let me see if we can get this a bit better up on the big screen here. Can everyone see that? Seems to be presenting. So what we're going to cover this evening, as Councillor Patrick said, is firstly finance update, but it will also cover the treasury management update, which is item 8 in the pack, as well as the capital update element of the performance report in item 9. So the topics we're going to run through today are an update on where we've ended up with regards to the general fund position for 22-23, the housing revenue account, as always a bit of economic context, work we're doing to balance the budget through to 26-27, so the 3 years beginning in 24-25. As always, and we've done this for a number of audit committees now, the great work that the Money Hub team are doing, and we'll also then provide an update of where we are with the accounts, and it's great to have the external auditors here this evening. And then finally, to conclude, we'll touch on the work that the committee is going to do over the coming year in relation to the deep dives that we discussed at the last meeting. So turning very quickly to the general fund forecast. The paper that's going to Cabinet this month. Are you okay for me to keep going? Great stuff. So that Mark will share us his IT skills here. Great stuff. Thanks for that, Mark. The forecast that we're identifying in terms of overspend is just under £8 million for the year. Obviously, after the application of the provisions we've made for the cyber attack, for the pay award, and for the cost pressures that we'd identified and budgeted for. We've also taken into account the reduction in national insurance contributions. What does the overspend relate to? Very simply, it's the pressures that we've been forecasting throughout the year and have looked to address as part of the budget build as much as we can for 23-24, seeing real challenges around the cost of care packages, and that's the whole country. Continued challenges in Climate Home's economy, particularly with planning income, given the difficulties that the economy continues to face, as well as within children's and education, continuing pressures, particularly around access and assessment. Within finance, we saw a rule that has overspends like a number of boroughs in temporary accommodation housing needs. One-off costs of the cyber attack in particular were around clearing the backlogs, the pressures that then fell onto income streams. The cyber attack costs were anticipated and are provided for in the 22-23 budget and by the reserves we set aside. Both residents and the council will continue to face significant financial pressures as the inflation surge is showing no sign of abating, as we saw today with the confirmation of the inflation figure for the current period of 8.7%. And I think we all expect tomorrow to see interest rates again rise, probably to, I think, given that inflation figure we saw today. As we know, inflation impacts on various council services, but in particular on those with significant energy, fuel and contract costs. And by contract costs, I'm really focusing there particularly on some of the pressures that our social care providers are experiencing. Whilst the pay award for 22-23 was higher than was budgeted for at the time, we also see a pressure that will need to be accommodated in the 23-24 budget. I would say though, for 23-24, we did put in just over 4% as a headline assumption into the budget, but I would expect it to be slightly more this time when we do the final analysis and get a final confirmation of that award. Turning to the housing revenue account position, overspend position forecast there of around £10 million. Principally though, that's going to be brought back into balance by not drawing down on the revenue contribution to capital due to the challenges that are experienced in the procurement of the housing maintenance programme. Obviously, without a full capital programme in 22-23, the RCCO is not required and therefore can be released. However, we have to be mindful of the backlog of maintenance work that will inevitably at some time have to be funded. Other areas of pressure that were experienced in housing related to special services, which effectively is sit, as well as reactive repairs due to significant inflationary pressures that were being experienced in the maintenance sector and the need to deal with backlogs, largely driven by the pandemic, but also with Bruce here, him and I have spent many hours discussing some of those urgent repairs that are faced, as well as the significant work the council is doing to address damp and mould works as well. Significant parts of the overspend, though, have also been offset by increases in dwelling and non-dwelling rent income and leaseholder charges. Turning to the economic context, I don't think anyone needs to be told that we're a bleak economic outlook with the cost of living crisis, with the OBR's latest forecast being that GDP will fall by around 0.2% in 2023. Whilst the Bank of England continues to bring forward counter-inflationary measures, we also continue to see cost of borrowing rise, and as I said earlier, we expect it to be rising and increase to 6% tomorrow, given the headlines that have been announced today. PD rates continue to increase, which means that local authorities have to incur a higher cost of borrowing, which brings further pressure onto capital programmes, and in particular to those capital schemes which require borrowing to fund. So I'm thinking there in particular some of our ambitious house building proposals. The annual unemployment will be just over 4% in 2023, compared with 3.7% in 2022. Turning to public sector net borrowing, I think we saw today, didn't we, the headline for the first time ever, total government borrowing is going to exceed UK GDP, which is the first time I think since 1961. Turning to the medium-term financial plan, this table isn't one that's a surprise to people. It's one we've presented since March when we set the budget. You can see the range of scenarios that are there, ranging from £57 million over the 3-year period up to just over £81 million. The team's making solid progress in looking at challenges faced in the early years, with proposals stretching out into future years as well. Work still to be done on that, and that's a piece of work which the whole corporate leadership team, working closely with the mayor and cabinet members, are working hard on to make sure that we've got detailed proposals in place, enable us to balance the budget for 24-25, but also set a clear glide path through to 26-27. Emerging risks in the current financial year, pay negotiations continue to be challenging. We saw offer made by the employers that was rejected. Concluded their ballot discussions until after the summer, and we'll have to wait until it settles that. But I would expect it to still come in higher than was initially proposed and for that went out there, which wasn't insignificant. It's continually important that group directors working closely with cabinet members prioritise any in-year recovery action, but also will work hard to look forward to bring forward any savings proposals from 24-25. Turning to the Council's capital programme and treasury management, so picking up another item in the papers here tonight, third OFP capital programme monitoring report shows for the financial year 22-23, we spent just under £140 million, below a revised budget of £168 million. Main reasons for these variances were economic factors with construction industry inflation resulting in tender prices coming back significantly higher than cost estimates, which required further work on the viability of schemes, as well as some other external factors, meaning programmes took longer, required a bit more review and reprofiling. I still think £140 million out of £170 million on average is a reasonable outturn given the challenges that are currently in the construction market. As part of close down for 22-23, officers have undertaken an analysis of all the original profiled schemes, and significant factors remain to be economic factors we saw with the CCG primary care project through the programme. Other external factors we know, as this committee's heard many times, the challenges the council face around Section 77 applications, as well as street scene Section 106 applications for highway schemes. We're going to see £25 million being of reprofiled spend driven by other external factors. Turning to the Council's capital programme and treasury management, as set out in the Treasury update, we have undertaken no new long-term borrowing. However, the cost of borrowing has risen sharply. Higher interest rates also mean there is an uptick in investment income, one-off again, and not sustainable given the move to increased borrowing. Interest rates have a high chance of climbing to as high as, well, as we thought then, 5.75%. I think we've revised that figure if we were doing these slides again today to nearer 6% given the announcements around inflation. And in mid-May 2023, our Treasury advisors forecasted a 20-year PWRB rate of around 4.8%. It'll be interesting to see what they revise that to after the announcements tomorrow. Turning to the Money Hub, that, just for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, the Money Hub, it's our team of specialist advisors established to support those in severe hardship who have no other source of monetary support available. For the last financial year, we saw that we paid out significant sums of money in relation to our Hackney discretionary crisis support scheme, which provides primarily home goods for unfurnished TA and Hackney housing properties, discretionary housing payments to support residents with housing benefit shortfalls. We paid out £2.2 million by the end of March, as well as just over £400,000 by the end of March for our council tax reduction scheme. Money Hub update 2, as well as paying out discretionary funds, it's very hard to make sure that benefits take up and looks to connect residents with other types of financial support. So what's the demand we've seen? We've seen over 5,000 residents request support since the team launched in November, which is more than applied for discretionary housing payments and the housing discretionary scheme in the whole of last year. More than half of applicants are already in rent or benefits uptake. The team's got benefits income for residents worth a total of just over 650,000. This is £1 per annum to 355 households. We've seen of that 40% relating to HB, 23% relating to social rent support, 21% council tax reduction, 14% pension credit, and 3%. The team is on target to meet its goal of £1 million of additional income confirmed for residents during its 12-month pilot, and we're working hard to see how we can extend that pilot. Some live examples just to bring this to life for people a bit more, bringing some of the individual cases to light here. So Miss T, 69, we made contact with her through a pension credit campaign. She was very wary of engaging with the council and insistent she didn't need support. Council officer Maxine slowly built that trust and relationship up with her over several weeks and encouraged her to come to the service centre for a discussion and made the applications with her. She's received a back payment of around £30,000 and ongoing increased income of around £10,000 a year. So a real change in her sort of life experiences and opportunities there. Turning to Mr. L, who's 82. He'd been living in Hoxton on £38 a week since reaching retirement age, having tried and failed to set up his own state pension entitlement. He received a pension credit letter in February, inviting him to visit a Money Hub centre. He finally came in May, and whilst when state pension, made the application for him. If you can do the maths of when he would have been entitled to state pension from 80 to 2005-6 is quite a number of years. And so he was entitled to a lump sum of just over £100,000 with ongoing increased income of £9,000. So not insignificant change in his circumstances. Based on these cases, we have identified 307 elderly residents who look like they are not in receipt of state pension, and we believe that around 10% could be eligible, and we'll begin a campaign very soon to make contact with them and support them to apply and hopefully get into payment. There, the opportunities to significantly change their life is very much within everyone's gift. Turning to the final sort of update here, the team is currently running research with 300 service users to understand impact and where it needs to improve. Asking, for example, where they heard about the Money Hub and what they thought of it. And I think, you know, you can see from the analysis that's done on the sort of keywords that come back, helpful is the one that stands out the most there, probably not a surprise. Turning to the accounts update, without sort of stealing Suresh and his team's thunder, we're expecting the 2021 accounts view and opinion imminently 122, substantially complete, with the main area outstanding being further testing required on assets, liabilities in relation to the pension fund, a requirement which has been driven entirely by the delays stroke time it's taken to get audits through, given that there's been a triennial valuation. We're hoping that by the end of July, an opinion received and that we can get that year signed off as well. Turning to the accounts which have just been published, and it's really pleasing to say that we were one of 8 London boroughs who were able to publish their accounts by the statutory deadline of the 31st of May. So I'd like to put on record my appreciation and thanks to all officers involved in that, but particularly Ms. Antonia and Shakot, who were real stars in getting all that work pulled together, and all members of the finance team led by. We're hoping that the audit will start sometime in July, and the Mazars audit plan and progress report is going to be presented to this committee in September. Just by way of reminder, really, that the committee has also agreed to a series of what we've historically now called deep dives. So the first of those, I think it's really pertinent that we have it, given the number of reports that have been issued very recently in relation to Woking and Thurrock and the commentaries we've heard, as well as the other ones that have been announced around Croydon and Slough, public interest reports. It's going to be a deep dive where we look to make sure that the council, particularly audit committee, but I know that as a team we've been discussing the value of maybe opening those sessions up to all, go through a review of recent reports and their implications for us. And we have done a lot of that work with the senior leadership team and with cabinet previously, as you'd expect, but I think that wider dissemination of all of that would be really helpful. The committee also was keen, based upon discussions with ourselves, recognising the pressure schools are under, to do a deeper dive into schools' finances and financial sustainability, and that's planned to come to our January audit committee, really pertinent with the substantial challenges inner London boroughs particularly are facing around falling rolls. And then the third deep dive, which shows, the great work that this committee continues to do and the activity of it. I think it's probably one of the most active audit committees in London, to look into the cost of capital and borrowing and really get that granular understanding of how that all works in relation to the capital programme as well. So there'll be obviously reports that come to this committee to summarise the work and learning and findings from those deep dives, but there will be deep dive sessions that will be held and obviously be opened up to people. So that's all in relation to those items. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think that was everyone reflecting that it was quite a dense but really good briefing. So thank you. And thank you so much for Sports for Life. It's a great work that the Money Hub are doing. I know I've sent a couple of questions on email, particularly around the credit score, and I thank officers for working on getting a note back. Yeah, I know we also share with the wider committee. I had a couple of questions just on the capital spend, because it seems like a couple of things are underspent, but I just wondered if there was any real reasons why they were so behind. Well, it feels like they're behind. So so mainly the asbestos surveys, solar, and the community halls were the ones that jumped out at me. I just wondered if there were any, reasons that could be spoken about those.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last one you mentioned.
So asbestos, solar projects, and then just community halls. Just generally.
Well, I'll probably have to get back to you on the second two, but on the first one, it's usually because we have a sort of set amount in the programme each year, and sometimes you need to do more than other years. Like, so it probably smooth itself out over a 3-year period. But I can certainly get back to you on the other two, because I don't know the specifics of those schemes.
Great, that'd be great. Thank you.
And I think, Chair, if we can also make sure we've picked up the other two reports as well and the recommendations for those. Okay, thank you. Also, the other two reports that, well, we've sort of covered those reports in the presentation, so it's just to make sure that the recommendations of those are also taken up. Thank you.
Chair, I just noted that various members didn't have the slides in either the hard pack or online, so
we'll get those
we were struggling a bit to see the presentation on the screen. So that's why maybe there's that sort of delay in questioning, because we don't have the material right in front of us to remind us what you said. Just mentioning that.
We'll get that circulated as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just by way of an introduction. So this is in relation to the 2021 audit, where we've now received the final audit letter, and in relation to 21-22, where we've got the audit completion reports which are attached. And they're just to clarify, the 2021 audit was delayed as a result of this national infrastructure issue, and the 21-22 similarly by that issue, but also now by the issue that Ian mentioned in relation to the IAS 19, which is the pension fund assets and liabilities testing. But I won't speak for Mazars. Mazars, if you could read for us.
Thanks, Jackie. Good evening, members of the committee. So there's 3 appendices in the supplementary paper. The first is on the 2021 audit, and the other 2 are the 21-22 council and pension fund audit completion reports. Before I ask Tom to just quickly talk you through the council audit completion report, and then Stuart to talk to you about the pension fund, I just wanted to clarify. So 2021, you've got the completion letter, and as it was drafted a few weeks ago, we were anticipating that we will be signed off by now. Unfortunately, our final review procedures on the final version of the statements identified a handful of small narrative adjustments that we requested were made. They were received this afternoon, and we're just going through our final review procedures to make sure that they're all as we expect. So as Ian alluded to, the opinion on 2021 is imminent, and just wanted to make that clear. And also just to highlight, for those members who have been on the committee for a while, you'll recall that we were unable to certify closure of the 18-19 and 19-20 audit because of initially an outstanding objection and then the infrastructure issue. Once we sign 2021, we will close those 2 audits as well. I appreciate it's a bit confusing about all the different years that are open. That's a technicality, but it essentially closes those audits down. So I'll hand over to Tom to talk you through the 21-22 council completion report.
Thank you, Suresh. So it's quite a dense report, so I'm going to cover 3 key areas, and I'll talk you through the page numbers as well as we go through. So the first one is the status of the audit and the anticipated opinion. The second will be our response to significant risks and findings. And then finally, I'll talk through some of the unadjusted misstatements that we've found. So the first page is page 19 that I'd like to draw your attention to. So the audit's substantially complete, as has been mentioned, and we're anticipating issuing an unqualified opinion. So the only item on this page that I'd really like to draw your attention to is the IS 19 disclosures. So these disclosures relate to the defined benefit pension scheme and are estimated based on actuarial reports from 2019. As Ian mentioned earlier, the council has now received the latest triennial review, and this provides actuals which have been updated, which impact on the assessment of the position of the liability at the year end. These are materially different to the estimated values which we use for the draft accounts, and we can't place any reliance on the new triennial valuation until the pension fund audit has carried out audit procedures on the membership data. So that's going to commence in July. If we now move forward to page 23 in the pack. So this is the significant findings section, and I'm going to talk you through briefly each of them. So the first one is management override of controls. So this affects all entities that are audited, and basically this is where there's organisations are in a unique position to perpetrate fraud because they could manipulate accounting records and prepare fraudulent financial statements by overriding controls. So we've addressed this risk by looking at the accounting estimates, by looking at the significant transactions outside the normal course of business, and also journals recorded in the general ledger and other adjustments made when preparing financial statements. And we have no significant findings to report as a result of our work on these transactions. Moving on to property, plant and equipment valuation. So this is a common area of audit focus that we look at on most councils. And so it's an area with a great deal of judgment and subjectivity, which involves the council using an external valuation expert and also internal ones. And we also engage with valuers as well to help support our challenge of these. So it's a very material balance. So I think the assets were about 3.9 billion of the council's 4.2 billion PPE balance at the end of March 2022. So we address the risk by assessing the valuer's qualifications, assessing the objectivity and independence of the valuer, reviewing the methodology used, and also performing tests of the underlying data and assumptions. We didn't find any significant issues from our audit procedures. However, there are unadjusted misstatements which are below the performance materiality, which I will come on to. What I would say is that the PP land and buildings valuations don't affect the service provision in the general fund, but they are a large area of the accounts. Moving on to the investment property valuation. This is quite similar to the work we carry out on the land and buildings valuation. So again, we review the methodology used and test the underlying data and assumptions. And again, we found some immaterial audit differences here, which I'll move on to shortly. And then finally is the net defined pension valuation. So this is where we look at the council's net liabilities, which were 700.7 million as at the 31st of March 2022. And again, this is an area which is inherently complex and uses discount rates, inflation rates and mortality rates to estimate what the liability will be. So the way that we address this is we assess the skill, competence and experience of the fund's actuary. We've challenged the reasonableness of the assumptions used by the actuary, and we've carried out a range of substantive procedures on the relevant information and cash flows used, and we'll have to perform more procedures on the member data. And then if you turn to page 31, this is our summary of misstatements found in the year. So we found a small misstatement which was related to an error in grant income which was received after year end, which should have been included in cost of services, but hadn't been accrued in error. So the 1.6 million there isn't the actual error itself. That's what we would consider it to be projected against the larger population that we've sampled from. The second error is the extrapolated adjustments, which we have found in investment property valuations. So basically, this isn't the full error here, but it's a projected error, which we consider that would be if it was against the whole population. And then we've also found some PP valuation errors, which were overstatements. And again, this is an extrapolation rather than the actual error. So in total, they don't come above performance materiality and don't require adjustment. And then the final adjustment, which you can see on page 32, is an adjustment which was brought forward from 2020, 2021. And this relates to the low traffic neighbourhood PCN provision, which arose as a result of the objection. Is there anything that you wanted to add in there, Suresh? I'll hand back to Suresh then. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, I'll take over at that point. Very quick run through the pension fund completion report, which follows in your pack. On page 57, we've set out the current outstanding points. The principal point is completion procedures, i.e. our internal steps that we need to do to make sure the file meets our relevant standards and has been reviewed completely. We do still have the piece of work to do on IAS 19 disclosures. That's not for pension fund accounts. That's very much a council accounts disclosure, but because it relates to pension fund information, as the auditor of the pension fund, we do it on that side. On pages 62 and 63, we set out the response to the two significant risks. As Tom mentioned, management override, which exists on every audit, cannot be removed. It's your ability to influence the figures. As with the council audit, we've got no points we wish to bring to your attention at that point. We also talk about level 3 investments, which are those investments which are harder to value. If you like, level 1 would be things like stock exchange valuations and the like. Level 3 are those that have less obvious markets, things like private equity, housing, properties. We have completed additional procedures around this, primarily focusing on other forms of assurance, largely around audited accounts and the like. We have I think there's one item we need to follow up slightly on that, but it's not expected to be an issue. It's just waiting for a confirmation. Outside of that, we have no unadjusted misstatements within the financial statements, which we've confirmed on page 68. At that point, I would stop on the pension fund, but obviously we're happy to take questions on any of the 3 reports and the 2 years of account that we're talking about.
Thank you for that. Page 12 of your report, significant findings. You mention in respect of council dwellings, these are reviewed using a beacon valuation methodology, which values council stock by grouping assets into type and using a nominated beacon asset for each group. Can you talk about any nominated beacon assets that you have used as your guidance, please? Thank you.
I struggled to hear your question, I'm sorry, but I think what you're relating to is could we refer to which HRA beacons we've used as part of our review of the beacon valuations? Yes, no problem. Yeah, so basically because there are such a huge number of council dwellings, it wouldn't be a reliable way of valuing to base it on a certain number of properties and extrapolate it without grouping them. So the way that the valuer does this is by taking a certain type of property, say it's a 2-bed semi-detached property or it could be a super high-rise single bedroom. So they would group properties based on number of bedrooms, location, and the type of property, be it a flat, a house, and the age. And then what they would do is they would say, this is a standard property and we'll apply this across the other nature. And in that way, it means that all of the properties are valued within the 5-year time frame, which they have to be. And then what we do is we look at them and say whether we think they're reasonable with the help of our valuations experts, and we say whether or not that's a reasonable way of doing it. So it works slightly different for the HRA properties.
Is Chair that the valuations across the borough would vary quite a lot, I'd say, in terms of different areas. So, for example, in the Beauvoir, if you were taking prices down there, they'd be a lot higher than, say, Homerton. So I suppose I'm just trying to work out have you actually managed to go across the borough and take selections from all different bits of it?
Yes, we have. So the way that we approach the sample selection itself is to examine all of the beacons and get a good spread across postcodes as well as the archetypes that we're looking at. So as part of that work, we take a map of the borough and project each of the postcodes onto it using Google Maps. So you can put them on there. And then when we're looking at the actual properties we've sampled, we make sure we don't just get a good spread on the types of bedrooms, what size of property it is, but also on the location as well.
Yeah, it was me, sorry. Thank you for that. No, thank you for that, it was really helpful. My question is 2 pages on from Councillor Smith's one, which is on the document I've got 14, which is just the line at the beginning of the significant matters discussed with management, where it says that the position in respect of the redress scheme was discussed. Can you explain a bit about what that means? No, not
So that's a typo. That shouldn't be there. Apologies.
interesting. Thank you.
If not, can we note the report? The next item, which is item 5, Children's Education Directorate Risk Register.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go through the risk register in great detail. I'll just draw members' attention to some key risks. So there aren't a great deal of changes in our risk register, but in terms of children education risk, further to the publication of the local child safeguarding practice review in March 2022 relating to child Q, a new directorate-wide risk was added to the risk register in 2022 and remains on the risk register. Everyone will be very aware of the update report regarding child Q that was published yesterday. So in terms of the range of controls that are in place, you will see in terms of the report, it references a lot of the work that's happened in the past year, and also just in terms of the council's response to the report being published yesterday. We've had a range of controls in place around that, but clearly the critical issue is safeguarding first approach with clear anti-racism values and an adultification training with a my child mindset. What if this was my child? So that's been a partnership-wide approach. So in terms of children and family risks, so we've had some significant delays responding to subject access requests, and this is partly the impact of the cyber attack in 2020, which has meant that many of our care experienced young people have had severe delays in gaining access to their records. This is really not what we'd want for any of our care experienced young people or for anyone who's in contact with the council. We've been working very closely with the team that looks after the subject access requests and have worked to get a more robust triage system in place so that we can advocate for requests to be escalated depending on need. We've also got the use of residential placements, and when children become looked after, we have a foster first approach, and we also have a mechanism of reviewing all of our most expensive placements with a view to looking first of all at meeting children's needs. And quite a few of our very expensive placements are very far away from Hackney and where children's communities are, so they're not our preferred way of looking after any of our children. So we have a robust way of reviewing these. We have a foster first approach, and actually fewer than 10% of our looked after children are in residential placements. But those who are tend to be very expensive because they've got a lot of complex needs that we have to make sure we've got enough resource to meet. In terms of education, I'd just like to draw the committee's attention to special education needs and disabilities. So the three risks here, one is about meeting the statutory 20-week deadline, and we have improved our performance on that. There's been a restructure of the SEND service and mitigation of how we're going to manage the requests for education, health and care plans, and that has had an impact and an ongoing impact. The overspend is of significant concern. There is a statutory override which allows us to carry the deficit on SEND over, and that's been extended to March 2026. We are working really closely with the Department for Education, and we're in wave 2 of their Better Value programme, which has included a very forensic overhaul of our current spend and our projected spend, our current need and our projected need, with a view to how we may be able to bring that, the costs of those down. But ultimately about, achieving really good outcomes for children. It's a really challenging piece of work, and I would like to be in a position where I could promise a solution, but it's rather more complex than that. I bring our attention to school place planning, which was on the risk register last year. So the council approved the school estate strategy in February 2022. So you'll be aware of the falling school rolls in Hackney and across London, in fact, in all of the major conurbations in England. So you'll be aware that we are taking action in terms of looking at our surplus places. We're allowed to have, I think it's 5% excess places in our schools, and we've got up to 22% across our primary sector at the moment. So Cabinet agreed recently that we could go to informal consultation in terms of managing those primary school places, the surplus. And we, of course, have our mind's eye is on the secondary schools as that cohort of children, or the cohort of children who are no longer with us, so they've moved out of the inner cities, affects secondary place planning as well. So there's no other risks that I particularly want to draw attention to, but I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Can I ask you a question? On the SEND placement, and also on the children in special care and in special placements, I wonder whether there's any work we could do across London to provide local authority facilities rather than private sector, where we don't have over the costs.
I think we stopped everyone from speaking, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent point. And I'm a member of the All London Directors of Children's Services Group, which is coordinated at London Council. So we've got a number of initiatives, particularly around looked after children. So you'll be aware that for those few children whose needs are so great, they need secure accommodation. There are no secure places in the southeast. So in London, we've gained some money from the DFE, and we're building 4 units across London. That's a kind of capital spend. We also have done some local sub-regional commissioning of some residential placements as well in the East London North East London, which means that we are able to look after more children in residential places more locally. In respect of special education needs places, for school places, as part of our school estate strategy, we have gained, I think it's about £5 million to help us, capital funding to help us deliver more local SEND places in our alternative provision in our local schools. So we've got a number of sites that we're working on at the moment, including with the Orthodox Jewish community as well, to ensure that we're meeting need for everyone in the Hackney Council area.
Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. Is that okay? Can people hear me? Thank you. Thanks very much for the report, Jackie. Mine's really a sort of overall question. We're obviously carrying quite a bit of risk in children's services, and that's, you know, it's a risky service. That's a sort of normal position. I mean, some of this risk is obviously some, you know, Hackney Pacific because of historical events in terms of the cyber attack, you know, the long tail of the cyber attack, and you know, obviously Child Q. But I just really wondered how you feel. We've obviously got quite a number of items in the red space. I just really wondered how you feel that our risk profile compares with your peers. I don't know whether you'd sort of know in terms of other, you know, our, comparable boroughs really in terms of Hackney's risk profile. Thank you.
We don't routinely compare risk registers, but I have worked in several different authorities myself, and I've been in this business for quite a while. So I would say that the cyber attack has put us in a different position for a number of authorities, but they will have that on their risk register just in case. So the impact of the cyber attack makes it very different from other authorities. The Child Q was an horrific event that quite frankly could have happened anywhere in London, but it happened in Hackney. And I think all local authorities are really mindful of that. So I think the majority of risks on there are known risks, and they're risks that we are able to put mitigation in place. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Gordon, children's services, we do carry a lot of risk. And, you know, the practitioners, the social work practitioners daily are carrying a lot of risk. So we have quite a highly evolved quality assurance system, and we also have quite a highly evolved performance management system and live dashboards so that we can see what's happening on a day-by-day basis as well as the oversight of City and Hackney Safeguarding Children Partnership, which holds us all to account. And the Child Q report and the published report yesterday is evidence of how much they do hold us to account. And of course, our scrutiny commissions.
Quick follow-up. I mean, just really, I mean, are you satisfied that this is a manageable level of risk and that you've got the systems and processes really in place, you know, in terms of, you know, protecting our service users? Thank you.
I think as a service, we work really hard to make sure we have enough mitigation in place. You just can never say never. I think it would be wrong of me to say that all the risks that outlined in this report aren't going to happen, because they do happen. And we know, particularly in safeguarding, that every day we see something on the news which tells us that something hasn't worked well for a child. So we are acutely mindful of that. And I cannot guarantee there is no risk in the service. And I don't think any Director of Children's Services would.
Yeah, apologies if I've missed this, but you've talking about falling school rolls. Are the numbers of children with special educational needs falling proportionately with that, or are they still going? Because you'd expect that if it's, say, I don't know, 20%, I don't know what, as that would go down, so would that. But it sounds like the falling rolls are going down, but there's not proportionately the same dropping down.
Absolutely right. So we've had a number of quite interesting insights in recent weeks into our SEND population, and also some of the assumptions made in the forecasting that we've been working on with the Department for Education through the Delivering Better Value programme. So you're absolutely right. One would assume that as the number of children go down, then the number of SEND educational health and care plans and children on SEND support would also decline. Actually, we're finding that it's quite the opposite. So our numbers are going up by about 400 a year. Yeah, it is. The proportion is higher. Yeah. And Hackney, we are, I'd say, an outlier. So we do issue proportionally more educational health and care plans than our statistical neighbours or across London.
Oh, it's because you've got, yeah. So do we know why it's not dropping down at the same time as the roll is dropping down?
We've only just recently had access to the forecasts that are saying it's not going to drop, so we haven't had an opportunity to interrogate that. And we're still really questioning the assumptions that have been made in that modelling as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add my thanks to the quality of this report. I found the cover sheet incredibly helpful and I felt like I got a real sense of the risks and just the great work of the team, really. I've got loads of questions, but I'm trying to prioritise. So one of them is on page 43 of the pack that I've got. It mentions, so in the SEND fund, escalating SEND spend, it mentions an external finance consultant had been commissioned to review funding to special schools. I just wondered what the outcome of that was. And then the other one's just on the description of the support offered to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and just some assurance around the safeguarding and tracking you've got. Just obviously we've heard about missing children in other places. So just a bit about how you keep track of the children.
So thank you for those questions. In respect of the financial review of our special schools, so we reviewed how much we're giving them, and we brought someone in externally to help us benchmark and help us make sure that we were allocating the right proportion of budget. And what that told us is we weren't, and we gave them an uplift. And so our special schools have been really happy about that. Because they had been complaining about it. So they complained, we looked into it, we did something about it, and we uplifted it. With regard to, sorry, did you say unaccompanied asylum-seeking children? So absolutely, it's a huge worry about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, particularly the ones who can go missing almost immediately. So they get allocated to us, and before we even really get eyes on in any great way, or we place them, then they can go missing, and it is a national problem. In terms of our safeguards, we have very tight protocols with our police colleagues around children who are missing. We have strategy meetings about those. We have ways of escalating them nationally, and we track them. And just because they're unaccompanied asylum-seeking children doesn't mean to say they're not at risk and we don't care, and that we're not following them, and we're not doing our best to locate them. But unfortunately, some children, some unaccompanied asylum-seeking children don't get located. I'm not aware of any in our authority at the moment, but we are very mindful, and the same standards we'd apply to our looked after children who have come from our local Hackney population, we apply those to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children as well.
Thank you. It's a very detailed report, so thank you for that. So on page 2, the pressures in regards to children and family services continue to be looked at beyond looked after children and leaving care arrangement costs. And then you go on to say, forecast overspend by 2.8 million after the use of 2 million commissioning. It goes on to say that there's a reduction in the use of residential care arrangements. However, the costs are increasing in residential care and semi-independent care arrangements due to care providers being faced with the challenges of rising inflation, etc. And then the control description is 1.5 million has been identified. These include reductions in the number of residential care arrangements. Is that related to the decrease in demand And if you'd just like to maybe talk about that, because that's a bit of a red flag for me. The other point in this particular paragraph, largely driven by a change in the profile of care arrangements linked to the complexity of care for children coming into the service. What do you think has driven that change to make that those care packages more complex? Is the second part to that question.
So apologies, so that the first part of the question was.
It's just the red flag on the number of residential care arrangements basically being dropped to save money.
Okay, so the number, our decisions about what's best for children is not driven by money, but we have to make sure that we are getting the right care packages for children and that we are not. I'm thinking carefully about my words here, but
Yeah,
so the residential market is largely private providers.
Mm.
And a lot of them are funded through venture capitalists, and they make a lot of money out of public bodies. So what my team do is when we make an arrangement for a child in a residential placement, my placement commissioning unit follows whatever plans we put in place. So it may be that a child has highly complex needs, so to settle them, in order to settle them and make them feel like they belong, we have to put in pay for additional resources. So what we do is we assiduously follow up to make sure what the outcome you want to achieve by putting in those resources, have they been met, so that we're bringing down the cost. Because if the child doesn't need it, we wouldn't be paying for it. And we're very aware that if authorities aren't on top of this, then some of the care providers will just continue to charge. So that's one thing.
Mm.
The other is in terms of reviewing our highest cost placement. So that's part of that. Are we getting the right value for money?
Mm.
Is it the right placement for a child? So a lot of these placements are far from Hackney, far away from where children's networks are, and particularly school relationships and peer relationships. So we do like to try and bring children back to Hackney whenever we can. The marketplace, and that sounds a terrible thing phrase to use about homes that we want to put for children to live in, isn't great. So that is why we're working across London to develop more opportunities for more places to be local, and which is why we have a foster first approach here. So in terms of the number of fostering placements we have on Hackney Council's fostering caring books, we're doing very well, and we're still recruiting. So some of our neighbours are quite envious of our ability to attract, recruit and retain carers. And also we put a lot of work into our occupancy levels being high. So that means that some of our fostering colleagues, for example, they go above and beyond, and they're phoning foster carers if we get a call out of hours, where once upon a time it might have been, we haven't got a foster care arrangement available, so that child will have to go to a residential placement. We have people who are on duty in the evening who will phone around foster carers that they know well and know will be a good match. So everything that we do in children's social care is about relationships. So I think what we're building is we've got a kind of senior manager, have relationships with their practitioners. They understand the children in their service. And our workers are having really good relationships with our foster carers, so that we're able to have that foster first approach. And in terms of children coming into care, so we would have a panel that Diane Benjamin, who's my excellent director of children's social care, chairs on a weekly basis, where there's requests for additional resources should children come into care, should they enter the public law outline, should they we start care proceedings, should they go to residential placement. They go to her, and she is very rigorous in making sure that we've done everything we possibly can to keep children with their families, to keep children close to Hackney, and also to keep costs down, because it's not always spending a lot of money that makes a difference to children, it's having the right resources. So I feel very passionate about making sure we spend public money very wisely, but that we get the right outcomes for children. So that's the answer to part one. Then part two, can you remind me what that was now? Sorry.
A lot to speak about here. I mean, it was the other part of it was basically the sort of the change in the profile of the care arrangements, leading to higher costs as to what might be that's all about. But you don't have to answer that. Chair, can I just ask a couple more about something different now? Because I think you've given us a, reassurance basically that you're in charge, remit or whatever. Page 12, no recourse to public funds team was formed in 2012 as a pilot. Just seeking assurance that that's going to continue. I mean, it seems to imply that it will do. And I just want to make sure that there's money in the pot for that to continue. That's number one. Look at one more. And then just on the Pan-London unaccompanied asylum seeking children element and the rota across London, my eye was drawn to the withdrawal from some authorities had a negative impact, increasing the numbers of UASC being dispersed to Hackney. Is there anything we can do to help sort of push other boroughs to take their fair share as well?
So in response to your question about the team supporting families with no recourse to public funds, we're absolutely committed to that service remaining in place. I think it's good for families, and and it's good for us to do that as well. So absolutely committed to that. In respect of our unaccompanied asylum seeking children, actually, I just was checking the numbers before I came out today. Our numbers have dropped. So we have fewer than we have done in recent times. But in terms of there is a national dispersal programme, and we do put pressure on our peers who aren't taking children from the rota. And sometimes they respond and other times they don't. But I'm really proud of our record in Hackney being very welcoming of unaccompanied asylum seeking children. I think it's the right thing to do to care for children who arrive on our shores, but absolutely agree that that the nation should be adopting that approach as well, and that we have to have a fair and equitable approach as far as possible.
Interesting and insightful. If we could move on to item 6, which is the Adult and Health Integration Directorate's risk register. We've got apologies from Helen Woodland and Georgina Dibbs, who's the Director of Adult Cares, who's, I believe, on the screen. He's introducing the report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to draw your attention to a number of the key risks. Apologies as well from Dr. Sandra Husbands, the Director of Public Health. So I'll try to cover some of the risks set out within the public health area as well. I guess the one I'd want to draw your attention to in public health particularly is in regards to access to sexual health services, incredibly important. There is a needs assessment which is annually updated. But we know that this is a demand-led area, and as demand is increasing, there are going to be challenges in the system around appointments, around clinician availability. There's a number of mitigations in place. As I mentioned, there's a needs assessment that's updated annually, and that would be leading to a draft strategy on improving sexual health access, the provision, and importantly, the outcomes for residents. A number of the services are delivered by NHS health partners. So again, it's part around how we work with the system and more widely with partners. There is a sexual and reproductive health strategy that's also being developed. Within adult social care, it's largely similar to last year, but there's probably 4 risks that I'd like to just draw your attention to. I guess the first would be in regards to the system. As Jackie mentioned, similar to children's, there was the kind of devastating impact of the cyber attack. And while we've had mosaic recovery in the last year, there's ongoing work to ensure that system is safe and effective. As a social worker by background myself, I know the importance of having a really robust system that we can use in order to effectively manage how we work with adults. So again, there's a lot of mitigating actions we're taking to make sure that system works, that it works for our staff, but importantly, the records belong to the residents, so making sure those are as safe and effective as they can be. I think the second risk I just wanted to draw your attention to, and the most significant, is that risk in the growing demand. I believe as of today, the increase we have seen across adult services is approximately 30% increase in those with long-term receiving support compared to before the pandemic. That's against a insufficient budget and resources for what is a statutory service. We are, of course, seeking to take any actions we can to mitigate that risk, but importantly, to mitigate that risk in a way that doesn't reduce or impact on the care and support that our residents are receiving. We do have some programs in place and are looking to work with a provider in the coming year to look at savings and to keep the budget within the envelope we have. The third risk I just wanted to draw your attention to is the sustainability of the market. Our market is incredibly important. It's not a large market within Hackney directly, but as we are within London, we aim to kind of also work with the providers around the area. What we want to ensure is that we don't have any providers handing contracts back or any closures, as we've seen in other areas, though not in Hackney. And that's very much about building good relationships with our providers, paying a fair but affordable rate for care, and focusing on the development of that market, and very much about a partnership approach. And the last risk I just wanted to draw your attention to, again, a lot of these risks, many of our colleagues and other authorities and is being seen nationally, is around recruitment within the social care workforce. I would also say it's within the health and social care workforce, because we're often working in partnership, again, around the care and support needs of our residents. There's a number of mitigating actions we're taking, particularly the appointment of a principal social worker last year, looking at how we recruit and retain our staff. That includes looking at the culture, the way we practice, the way we work, ensuring that we're attracting the right caliber of staff to support our residents. So those are the key risks I wanted to highlight today, though there are a number of other ones in the report. I'm happy to take any questions and try to answer where I can.
I've got a question. On the adult social care, health scrutiny picked up the issue of the problem with placements, most placements throughout our borough, and asked the Director of Regeneration and Helen Woodland to go away and look at providing some placements in the borough for adults. And I don't know where that's got to. We did look at the council's house building programme and wonder whether some of those properties could be turned into housing with care. And there was talk about working with housing associations. I don't know where that's got to.
Sure.
I'm also quite concerned on page 67, the substance misuse money and the fact that it may not get spent. Perhaps you could pick them up, and I don't know if members have got any others.
Sure, happy to. I'll try my best with 67. That's a public health risk, but I'm happy to try to talk that through. So if I start with a run around linking to the health scrutiny and the discussion around a capital build programme, that was very much focused on ensuring that there's adequate accommodation options, particularly supported living, or what we often term as housing with care. So those are tenancies for people where they have their own tenancy, they have their own accommodation, but that care is delivered within that accommodation to keep them as independent and well within their own community. Need to be really clear, that is not the same as residential or nursing care. If someone is in need of nursing care, really that can only be provided within a nursing home to make sure there's adequate staff and that their needs are being fully met. However, we very much seek to try to keep people at home and in the community for as long as is possible with the support that they need. We are developing that capital build programme and the business case around what that would mean. I believe we made a commitment to come back within 6 months from the date of the last health scrutiny, but that is progressing. We are looking at that approach, which has been used in other local authorities, where we can, trying to learn And then we'll build a business case from that point and bring that back to scrutiny. Does that feel like an adequate response to your question before I move on?
Thank you.
Okay, so the second question you asked about was in relation to substance misuse. So there is a change. It's something called the City and Hackney Combating Drugs Partnership. And that came out of a 10-year drug strategy called From Harm to Hope. And the strategy aims to reduce drug-related harms, death, crime, and overall drug use. There's 3 priorities that we need to focus on within that group, which is to deliver a world-class treatment and recovery system, breaking the drug supply chain, and a generational shift in the demand for drugs. So there's a huge kind of remit within that Combating Drugs Partnership. Of course, as you'd expect, it's multi-agency with the local authority, police, our substance misuse providers and others. Absolutely, it's kind of listed there as a risk, but I think positively, there's a number of mitigating actions and working with legal to try to make sure that grant money is spent. I think what's been set out here is that there's a particular route that we're looking at the moment, and we'd fully explore that with legal before we look at other avenues in terms of spending that money. I'm more than happy to speak to the public health team to get a more detailed response, though, if that is helpful.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. Just looking at the cost pressures in relation to providing adult social care and the level of, you identify the current level of funding is not going to meet the need. I mean, I must admit, I don't know the sort of detail, the profile of the sort of how this service is provided, but I just wondered whether there is anything that we can explore further in relation to insourcing these services, and whether that would be a way of relieving some of those pressures as well as all the other benefits of insourcing. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much for that question. So a huge cost pressure within the adult social care budget is the social care commissioning. So when an individual often comes to us needing long-term support, we look at what can meet those needs. That's a range of different things. It's not always a commissioned service, but in a number of instances, we do need to put in care and support. That's sometimes care at home, what we call domiciliary care packages, or it could be residential or nursing care or other types of provision. That is the most significant area with cost pressures. I guess what I would say is that we know in terms of insourcing, that actually comes at a higher cost to the council. So the cost of delivering services, bringing in, for example, that provision of care has higher on costs than it would within the private sector. So that would actually result in an increase to the adult social care budget if we were to bring that in service. For me, I think the most important thing, and it links back to that first question by the chair, is around what we can do in order to keep people independent at home and or in supported living or within housing with care. Because that brings in a reduced cost because of the person having their own tenancy. So that is something we're exploring through the potential for a capital build program. So increasing the number of supported living accommodations that people can access and then have care delivered at home.
Thank you. Yeah, and just adding my thanks to the detailed work that obviously happens in your team and in public health. I'd be really interested in hearing more about the alcohol and other drugs service, because yeah, I think it would be a real concern if we do lose out on that funding. So I know there's some really good stuff happening there, and I appreciate that people are probably doing as much as they can to resolve it, but it would be good to understand that. I did have a couple of questions on the sexual health bit, but appreciate they might need to be answered outside. So one was just, it mentioned staffing constraints, and I wondered if that was like a short-term or a long-term problem. And then I'm really interested in inequality and access to services. So I'd be really interesting to understand that when it talks about kind of outcomes for residents, like we know that there's disparities in kind of age, ethnicity, and LGBTIQA plus access to sexual health services. It'd just be really, and that's maybe a bit niche for here, but happy to follow that one up outside. And then on the retainment bit, so recruitment and retainment, I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about what you were saying that you're changing, and if you learn anything from exit interviews. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think with the questions you asked around the sexual health particularly, I will have to probably go to the Director of Public Health, but I've noted down those questions and I'll make sure those responses come back to you. In terms of the recruitment and retention, I mean, I have to be honest, this is it's across health and social care, as I mentioned, and it's a national issue in terms of the recruitment, particularly for in adult social care. There's particular challenges around recruitment of social works and occupational therapists. We did a significant piece of work last year to look at exit interviews. We also did interviews with existing staff to understand why, for example, individuals remained as agency or locum members of staff, what might be a driver for them in terms of taking up permanent recruitment, as well as speaking to just existing staff around why do they stay in Hackney? So what is it about Hackney that helps to retain staff? And that overall was incredibly positive. It was really interesting to note that particularly for locum and agency staff, while we would have thought that the wage was a driver, it actually isn't. It's often about the working environment, the organizational culture, and making sure that it feels like the right place for them to develop as part of a team and department and actually part of the wider council, which was really positive to hear. In response to that, there's a number of things that we're doing in terms of improving the I guess those coming into Hackney as well as retaining. We have a social work apprenticeship program, which I think there's a real huge kind of request for us to increase the amount of places available, which is incredibly positive. So we have a huge number of staff, both within adult social care and the wider council, who would love the opportunity to be trained as a social worker. So we're looking at increasing numbers going forward. At the moment, we've got 2 staff per year who are put onto the social work apprenticeship. And I know that Equally Children's also have the same offer. We're also doing the same for occupational therapy as well. Another thing that we've done, we've been able to convert agency to permanent members of staff. That's been really positive. And interestingly, this year, we've had a huge number of locum staff who've looked to go permanent. The main drivers for that are often the management team and feeling that they're supported, that there's career development pathways. And we've also changed the structure to make that move up and that step up into management roles easier without a really big gap. We're also doing recruitment campaigns. We've got one live at the moment, looking at social work, senior social work, and team manager recruitment, and really trying to set out the benefits of working in Hackney. And there's a whole bunch around anti-racism, around a trauma-informed approach. And really just about, for me, it's reigniting that passion around social work and social care. So we're hoping to see some good outcomes from that work as well.
Thank you. Another crazy report with loads of good stuff and material in there. So thank you for that. Yeah, I just want to talk about vaccination coverage across a variety of infectious diseases. Obviously, George Osborne was in the news yesterday in relation to the pandemic, and money's available and preparedness for that. Looking at us going forward, have we? I mean, obviously, we must have learnings somewhere from how we dealt with the pandemic. Do we have any contingency plans in place to deal with any forthcoming pandemic? Don't want to really use that word, but problem with infectious disease coming down the line. How well are we prepared for that? And how is it going with the engagement with the communities and staff groups who have been vaccine hesitant? And you do mention in here that we've been trying to work with the Charili community to encourage behaviour change and vaccine uptake. So that's the first question about vaccinations. And then on page 6, the joint service situation, Hackney or the City of London do not feel that they are getting suitable public health services as part of joint service and seek to withdraw from the joint service, causing disruption to the public health service provision. I note that the risk seems to have gone down. Well, there's an arrow on the right-hand side, but it seems like quite a big risk, that to me. And I'm just wondering essentially why that has gone down rather than up.
So you've asked some really good questions. They're all related to public health. I probably can't answer them with the detail that you would need coming from adult social care, particularly around the vaccinations and the amount of work that they're doing. As I noted in regards to other public health questions, I have noted them down. I will pass them on to the Director of Public Health. I will try where I can to note about the joint service. It absolutely is a joint service, and I know that from adult social care because they're very, very clear. They are a City and Hackney public health team, and hence the services and the consideration around activities are always done kind of joint across the area, although taking into account there will be some differences in terms of the population and the need. I think the other thing, particularly the reason it's gone down, is some of the controls and some of the control descriptions. So it's around the communication, it's around the relationships. We are, very, very relationship based in terms of how we worked. And there are a number of, there's a SLA that has been signed with City of London for implementation for a 3-year period. So I think it's around the relationships, the influence, how they work. They are quite clear around how they work across the area. And from what I understand, there's a lot of confidence in that continuing. I will ask Sandra Husbands, the Director of Public Health, though, to come back with any additional detail.
Thank you for that assurance. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, Matt will give us a very quick update and we'll move to questions.
Excuse me. Good evening, everyone. Yes, so I'll quickly go through the main changes since this register was last presented to Audit Committee, which was at the January meeting. You did actually receive a summary scorecard of the corporate risks at the April meeting, but it's every 6 months that we go through the register in full. So the cost of living crisis continues to dominate this corporate risk register, with descriptions and controls all updated to reflect changing circumstances. Even with energy costs and inflation starting to drop, now at 8.7% from a high of 11.1, multiple challenges remain. The temporary accommodation risk has now risen to the maximum score. This illustrates the extreme pressures on this service and the limited resources to effectively deal with the demands. The overall cybersecurity risk, and then the one relating to the aftermath of the cyber attack and the vulnerabilities there, have both been merged now, so that's one large risk. As was mentioned before by Jackie, the risk relating to surplus school places and the impact on proposed primary school closures was a new risk, escalated to this register by Hackney Education in April. And obviously it remains on the register. And as we heard before, this is likely to have a long-term impact and down the line could also affect secondary schools. The 2 new corporate risks that were escalated within the January iteration relating to major service outage and children's residential placements both remain on this corporate register. And with regards to the climate change targets risks, with the climate action plan being signed off in May, this is an important ongoing control in attempting to mitigate this risk. However, the score does remain red here, reflecting the continuing long-term pressures relating to targets, etc. So yeah, obviously there's a lot of detail within that report, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you. This is really helpful. So I've just asked two quick ones. So one is on the commercialization of services, which just seemed thin on detail of plans. So I don't know if that's all the, yeah, that's completely kind of in train, given the kind of risk related to it. And then the other one is people on page 104 of my pack. Sorry, I'm just going to see what it actually, what the page number, oh, it's not got any other page numbers, but it says about people being evicted from supported housing, which just sounded a bit alarming. So I just wondered if there was any information about that. It's on the temporary accommodation risk.
Yeah, I think I'd need to come back to you, talk to the relevant head of service there to get any specifics, unless anyone else has any comments on that.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So the internal audit report is a backward-looking report considering the last year for internal audit. It's a report to note with the exception of the updated internal audit charter at Appendix 6, which we need your approval or comments otherwise on. The charter, it's cosmetic updates only to reflect new positions as a result of a restructure to the service. The key message from the annual report is that the conclusion from audit work undertaken this year is that the Council's control framework is adequate, remains robust despite the challenges Hackney has faced during the last year and also significant events in recent years. So while adequate might not seem like the most glowing endorsement, we are saying that things are okay on the basis of the work that we've undertaken and other assurance sources available to us. Significantly more audit reviews were undertaken during 22-23 than in the previous year. So that was 41 as opposed to 29. Significantly more recommendations arose from those audits than the previous year. So that's 140 as compared to 56. But the reported implementation rates are lower. So the implementation of high recommendations this year was 90% compared to 96% previously, which is still within the bounds of our KPI measure. For the medium recommendations, it's 84% implemented this year compared to 92% previously. One factor behind that is that the increased productivity of the team in terms of getting through audit work has taken resources away from being able to chase up and check that things have been implemented as they were meant to be. So it's possible that more implementation has taken place than those figures are showing, but we haven't been able to document it at this time. That is ongoing for us. Most of the audit work undertaken resulted in a positive audit opinion. So that's either reasonable or significant assurance for the service that was reviewed. There was one no assurance audit, which referred to a TMO. Now, where there is a poor assurance rating like that, our processes require we go back and we have another look within a short period of time to establish that how things might have changed, what recommendations have been implemented since the last review. And within the course of the year, that review was carried out and the TMO had moved from no assurance to reasonable assurance. In terms of the overall levels of assurance coming out of audit work, It's comfortably within the parameters of recent years, so the assurance ratings are consistent. What I would note is that 22 audits from last year's audit plan were postponed or cancelled, and there was two principal reasons for that. So first of all, it continues to be the case that in many services there are interim arrangements in place following on from the cyber attack. So there's different ways of working. There are genuine impacts on the way that services are structured, the data available, and some of the systems that are available to teams. So while we acknowledge that that is genuine, I'm also open to the possibility that it's not unreasonable to think that assurance levels might be lower in services where those factors continue to be acute. So that's a note of caution on the good assessment of resulting from the work that we have undertaken. The other area where the audit programme was impeded was the ICT audits. And the reason for that is the necessary focus on recovery from the cyber attack. And also that service has been subject to a significant restructure in year. So while very little audit work was able to progress last year, that is a changing situation. Audits are now going ahead. One is close to completion. The outcome from that audit is looking like it's going to be a positive one. So it's not finalised, but it's not that we haven't had a look for a while and there's a nasty surprise waiting in that particular area. And the audit plan for ICT, I am much more optimistic for that for the year ahead than the year just gone. I'd also note that audit work undertaken year to year is different. We look at different services, that's risk assessed as to what we focus on, but the fact that we're looking at different things in different years means that you shouldn't expect an exact consistency in terms of outcome from the work year on year. It will naturally change because we're looking at different things. Also, just to flag to the committee that the work that the team undertakes is in accordance with the public sector internal audit standards. That's particularly current at the moment because I think you've all been contacted in connection with the review that's coming for the internal audit service at Hackney to give that assurance that we are compliant with the many standards that we're required to follow. It's notable that one area of non-compliance is that we haven't had the external review of our service since 2016. That should take place every 5 years. Due to firstly the pandemic and then the cyber attack, our review has been delayed. So on that measure alone, we're not compliant as a service. But we do undertake an internal assessment between those external reviews. That was last concluded in February, March this year, and that showed that in all other meaningful ways the service is compliant with the expected standards. So obviously an external review is probably going to have a slightly more critical approach than an internal review, but there is that level of assurance for you as things stand. And also just to flag that I think that surveys have been sent to all members. Would be really grateful if you'd be able to give your feedback as best you're able to. I appreciate for some members, this is the first meeting that you'll have been to, and so it's not been possible to do that as yet. But whatever feedback you're able to give, we'll be grateful for your help with that process. The last point that I'd just draw your attention to on the internal audit update is that Appendix 8 is the draft annual governance statement. That's a document that will come back to you later in the year as part of the council's accounts. But because of this committee's concern with governance arrangements, we wanted you to have a look at that document because obviously the accounts is a very large piece of work and didn't want it to get lost in there. So it's just giving you free sight of that and the sorts of issues that are flagged in it. So I will pause there and happy to take any questions.
Can I ask you, so as you know, I'm new, but you talked about the deferred audits, and that looks quite worrying, but I don't know if it is. And well, do we need as a committee for it to come, for those, a response from the directorates about why they've been deferred, or will they be taken up later?
I think what would probably be helpful, I can circulate the last progress report. The progress reports, as distinct from this annual review, include a summary of the audits that have been postponed or cancelled and the reason for that. If I circulate that, it'll give you just slightly more detail as to the reasons behind that. And I'd also flag that where projects have been delayed, they've been rolled forward to this year's audit plan, and you would then be able to see that that is still work that's to go ahead. I think the role for the committee would be that if a particular review was consistently being pushed back and we couldn't get traction, then I think that's the point that I would come to you and welcome your assistance. But we're not in that space yet.
Okay, and my other question is about the review, the audits you've done where there's still outstanding work that are high. Is there any? Sorry, I thought there was.
Sorry, Chair, could you just point me to a page reference
Sorry,
for that?
I've lost it. I'll come back to you. Does anybody else want to? Cascade.
Chair, can I just check, is it the bottom of page 176, the high priority recommendations? Yes. Okay, so that they are, that the KPI that we have on implementation of the high priority recommendations is 90%. And the level that we have is 68% of high recommendations have been fully implemented, and another 22% are in progress. So my concerns start to rise when there's no feedback coming from people about how those recommendations are being implemented. We always, when we agree the audit report, we set out, first of all, we agree the recommendation, and we also put an expected timescale to implement. And then we will track the progress towards that implementation. So where there's assurance that services are working towards implementation, it could be that they need longer to implement than first anticipated. And we'd much rather have that honest discussion with people as we go along. And if it needs a bit longer, then that's fine. As I say, the concern is when there's no progress towards implementation that we start to get worried.
Thank you. That was really helpful. A lot of my questions were covered with Chair's question as well as your summary. But I just had a question about in the policy or the strategy, where it talks about the effectiveness of our governance framework and just generally our approach. Do we ever speak to residents about what their views are? Because it lists, you know, a number of people that we talk to, and I just don't know if that's something that we do or is appropriate.
It's not something that we do from an audit perspective, or we haven't historically, but can you leave me to have a think about that and see what scope there might be, and if there is scope, how we could go about it?
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, you know, they do engage sometimes more widely in our kind of governance and holding us to account. So it'd be just good. I know we ask residents to feed into what topics they might want to see at scrutiny and things, but it's just, yeah, if we ever give them a chance to say, I don't know, I don't have a clear idea of what it would look like, but it's just something I thought about when I was reading who is asked. Thank you.
Sorry, just if the thought was related to what areas audit would look at, we have to do that on a risk basis. So we have to have an assessment as to what areas in the council are subject to most risk, and we have to base the plan on that. So it does have to be an informed and fairly scientific approach that we take to that, and that's set out as part of the standards that we're measured against.
Just wanted to add to that, the internal control statement, which Michael, so the way that is completed is a fundamental sort of review of internal control systems, which is carried out within directorates and signed off by the group directors. And so behind that there's a lot of evidence which talks about some of the things you mentioned in terms of resident engagement, so the feedback on services and how they're dealt with as well. So that sort of encapsulates that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just wanted to clarify, because I was looking through when it had the bit about repairs backlog, and it says draft. Firstly, does that include the issues around damp and mould? Because obviously that's a particular subset really of repairs. And what does draft mean? Have we got a report on that? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. So draft is when the audit reaches the stage that we've prepared a draft report that's shared with the service, but we need to agree that obviously. We reach our conclusions, but it's only proper that the service has a opportunity to comment, and also where we're making recommendations to feed into those, agree the timescales and exactly what's going to be done. So that's what draft means. So it's not at the point where we can categorically say there's going to be so many recommendations and audit have reached a final view. So what you will see is, it should be at the next audit committee meeting that will have moved to final, and it will give you the assurance rating for the piece of work and the number of recommendations.
So we'll see sight of it at the next one, and that does cover the issues that we have around damp and mould.
That audit will not have looked specifically at damp and mould, because at the time that audit was agreed, it was part of the previous year's audit plan. So we're going back to March 22, and the focus of the audit was the backlog that had built up through the pandemic for multiple reasons, including damp and mould will be part of it, but it wasn't a specific thing that we highlighted.
So will that be looked at in the next cycle? Because obviously we've now got certain targets around how quickly we get out to people and manage it.
I'm sure that will be part of a future audit review. As I say, it's a risk-based plan, so we'll look at the threats facing the council as a whole, and that's clearly an important one.
Thanks.
Yeah, bit of a contentious one. This, you can stop me asking the question if you feel it's appropriate. It's about the schools closures consultation is going on at the moment, and in the document, page 180, Culverston School, 180 chair, has had a reasonable audit assurance done. It's currently in draft. There are issues around what people think about the sort of situation around Culverston. Pardon?
So that it's related to scrutiny. Not scrutiny, audit.
I suppose the point is, you've classified it as reasonable assurance that things are
That'll
going
be
on.
their accounts.
The accounts, yeah, because
No one's saying there's anything wrong with the school's accounts, just saying that they've got falling roles.
yeah, okay, we'll leave it there.
I believe, Jack,
That's correct. You're correct.
children.
You're correct that the audit that Michael's team undertake is around, looking at the controls that are in place and the control environments. That's what that's about, and that's why we do, not an insignificant number of schools every year, isn't it?
It's also worth noting the same point applies, that the audit plan that resulted in that review was finalised March 22, so before the current issues were on anybody's radar.
Thank you.
I just note something quickly. I know I asked some questions by email, and just to say that you were going to pick up that the right to buy audit was going to be put back on. Yeah, I think that was just fell off, but just
Yeah,
so
apologies, we
members
missed
know.
that. It was an admin. Yeah.
It is, thank you. So again, this is backward looking at the last 12 months. So I'm going to not go into too much detail because regular committee members will have heard most of this in April. So the referral volumes for all fraud types, excluding fraud inquiries, have increased by 35% over 21-22. Fraud inquiries are incoming queries to the team from other councils, the police, etc., for their investigations where they need information from the council under legal gateways. So they're quite simple things for us to deal with. In terms of the big ticket items, all of those areas have increased in terms of referrals through to the team. Very briefly, the main areas that we focus on: tenancy fraud, saw 49 tenancies that were ended following investigation during the year, which is a 44% increase on the previous year. There continue to be challenges in the capacity of the legal system, and that's having impacts on results last year and this. It's the area that delivers the biggest benefit in terms of the financial measure to Hackney from the work that the team does. Blue badges and other parking inquiries. There were reactive investigations following referrals to the team, and also proactive actions targeted at parking hotspots through the borough. Outcomes from a range of sanctions increased during the year, and we've also had a focus on the most serious types of offending, and that's resulted in a number of prosecutions during the year. So in terms of most serious offending, two examples is people that are using stolen blue badges and people using fraudulent blue badges. There's a scale of misuse, so borrowing mum's badge to go and park to go to the shops is not good, but the trade in stolen blue badges is a level or two above that. The no recourse to public funds, the number of support packages cancelled in the year just gone doubled from the previous year, but I would note that actually the previous year was the anomaly. The results this year were much more consistent with all of the previous years that you'll see reported for comparison. It's important to note that's a collaborative approach. The fraud investigator is part of a team that's embedded with children's services. And also what I say every year when I introduce this report is that we are mindful that misuse in this area is driven by need, not greed. But the council does have a responsibility to make sure that those funds are properly administered, particularly when we've heard from Jackie earlier this evening about the other pressures in the Children's and Education's department. So we have to make sure that we're making the best use of the money that is available to us. An estimate of the total benefits from the counter fraud investigations this year is 4.9 million. That compares to 3.1 million last year, and as a pre-pandemic comparator, that 4.9 million compares to 5.7 million in 1920. So we are back on track, not quite at pre-pandemic levels, but not far off, and a big improvement during the year. I'm also just going to deviate slightly from the report and just to let the committee know about a recent result that happened since this report was prepared. We undertake inquiries under the Proceeds of Crime Act, which allow us to take back the proceeds of crime from those who commit offences against the council. There was a case recently where business premises above a pub were converted to 13 residential lets. The process for that, they did not comply with the planning process. None of the conversions met the minimum requirements in terms of space. So the minimum requirement for a new conversion is 37 metres squared. None of them met that. One of them was only 9 metres squared. The business did not comply with the enforcement notice, so we took legal action to go after the criminal benefit that the landlord had received, and the criminal benefit was the rent that they continued to receive despite not having complied with the planning process. As a result of that prosecution, the council was successful in getting a £261,000 award under the Proceeds of Crime Act, in addition to a fine of 15,000 and costs of 8,000 in the council's favour. So it's probably important to note that that £261,000 under the Proceeds of Crime Act legislation does not all come to Hackney. It gets split, 50% goes to the Treasury, and of the remaining 50%, a third goes to the court, a third goes to the investigating agency, and a third goes to the prosecuting agency. Hackney was the investigating and the prosecuting agency, so effectively a third of that money will be on its way back to Hackney. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens when the criminal makes payment. You might be thinking that how many times does somebody actually pay all that they have to the council? But the Proceeds of Crime Act does have teeth. If someone doesn't comply and doesn't make the payments that they're required to, they will find themselves facing jail time. And our experience is that those funds do come back to us. So on that good news story, I'll pause and take any questions that you might have.
I think the regulations are in order for that, and it's good news. I've got a question. On the tenancy audit, I would imagine a lot of this is either people putting themselves forward for tenancies they're not entitled to, or people remaining in properties that they're not entitled to remain in. And I wonder whether there's anything more that housing services can do by their tenant inspections to make sure that the right people are living in the properties.
Thank you. Okay, so it's worth noting that the tenancy audit programme, and the inclusion of the word audit there is not helpful because it's not anything that my service is responsible for. Tenancy audit is where housing officers go and knock on doors and check that circumstances are as declared. So it's worth noting that some fraud referrals do result from that process. So if the housing officer identifies that something's not as it should be, and it's appropriate to our team, a referral will come through. There are also other ways that referrals will come through from housing. So, for example, we do get referrals when succession applications come in, and if it appears that someone's provided a fictitious account as part of that, again, it would come to the fraud team. We're also looking at how we can inform that tenancy audit programme that housing undertake through use of some of the data that comes from the National Fraud Initiative, which is a data matching exercise that it takes Hackney's data, compares it to other local authorities, and, for example, would look and see where someone with the same name has more than one tenancy, or where the same national insurance number is linked to more than one tenancy, that sort of thing. The reports we get from the National Fraud Initiative, some of them it's clear that the fraud team needs to investigate, but quite frankly, we get so much data come back that we can't realistically get through all of it. So it's looking at how some of that could be given to inform the tenancy audit programme. That's something that we're working with colleagues on. So that there are links and synergies, and housing and anti-fraud do work together to get the best out of the resources available to us.
I'll just ask a quick question, just on the study that you just kind of presented. How was that referred to the service? Like, was that through the housing team, or just interested in how people flag that kind of situation for you? Thanks.
So just to clarify, that was the planning case study. Okay, so that was not a tenancy fraud investigation. That resulted from the planning service becoming aware that unapproved works had taken place. I don't honestly know how they picked that up in the first instance, but they had picked that up. They took the enforcement action that they would normally take, and it was because there was a court order in favour of that, which wasn't complied with, and they went on to make a criminal benefit, that they knew that we have the Proceeds of Crime Act powers available through the fraud team, and they made the referral that way.
Making my first meeting as easy as it's been, and another significant is it's Mr. Williams' last meeting. I know he's got even redder than he was when he started tonight, but I think I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the chair and behalf of all members for the work that Ian has done. He took over the work that Tim Shields, our previous chief executive, did as Director of Finance, and has taken Hackney from strength to strength in his leadership of our finance department, and we really wish him well in Liverpool. And I think he might find lots of similarities in Liverpool to what it is in Hackney, and he would be sorely missed, and we wish him well for the future. And he's done a fantastic job. Thank you very much. That's the meeting over.